Joining me today are Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy, KG No, journalist, writer, and educator, and David Tizzard, Assistant Professor of Korean Studies at Seoul Women's University. David, I will start with you. For those who are not following China-South Korea relationship closely, share with us your knowledge about this background of this visit.
Good evening. Thank you for having me, and thank you for a very difficult question to begin with, the background of Korea-China relations. We can say with some certainty that they have been rather rocky, certainly under the previous South Korean president, Yoon Suk-yeol. There was very much an anti-Chinese sentiment here in South Korea. Going a little bit further back, we had the THAAD diplomacy, and that really caused an economic rupture in South Korea-China relations. And that was very sad because geographically, culturally, these countries are so close. I have many students from China that come here and they love the culture, they love the food, the pop music, the dramas. And so over the last decade or so, the fact that these two countries have been pulled apart by economics, by geopolitics, has been rather sad. And so to see what we've seen today, to see the two leaders from Seoul and Beijing come together and show the world almost how diplomacy can and should be done, because just looking around the world, that there's lots of things happening. There's lots of things where leaders don't seem to be able to come together, where force is being used rather than handshakes and smiles. So while there is a lot of history and baggage, I was really moved today to see President Xi Jinping and President Lee Jae-myung come together, smile, shake hands and say, how can we build a safe future, not for these two countries, but for the region more broadly, and kind of show the world, hey, pay attention, because this is how diplomacy is done, and this is how trade and economics can work together, even if politics doesn't always align 100%. So there's a lot of history being changed. I'll just leave you with one thing, which is President Lee Jae-myung today. He said that this year marks the first year of the full restoration of South Korea-China relations. That's a bold statement to make, but new beginnings certainly for both Beijing and Seoul following their meeting, I think.
Zhao Hai, from the Chinese perspective, how do you characterize the current China-Korea relationship here?
Well, I think right now is a good time to improve bilateral relationship. For the past decade, as the previous speaker has mentioned, there's a very disrupted relationship between the two countries, two neighbors and two partners, because of geopolitical issues, because of Korean Peninsula, very complicated nuclear issues, and because of the relationship between South Korea and the United States. So at this particular moment, I think with the domestic political shift within South Korea, now we have a renewed opportunity for the two top leaders to talk about the future and plan for the future of these two countries, because we have shared interest in economic cooperation, in regional peace and stability, in Korean Peninsula peace and stability, and also to a larger extent for free trade and globalization in the world. So I think this visit at a very critical moment, given what happened just days ago in Latin America, in South America. So it's getting even more significant for this visit. And I think the two top leaders just walking out of their talks, and if you look at the transcript, they talk about many issues that particularly the shared interest in defending the post-World War II international order. And that order has been gradually, piece by piece, being dismantled by actors in today's world. And it's very important for the two countries to work together to maintain that international order, because without that order, East Asia will be thrown back into chaos and into a very dangerous geopolitical situation. So I think in that particular respect, there's a lot to talk about for the two sides. And given what, in the following days, because President Lee will remain in China for 4 days, he's not only visiting Beijing, but also Shanghai, and he's going to get in-depth understanding of what happened in the past decade, how China has progressed, and how South Korea can take this opportunity, and particularly in the next 5 years, when China is implementing the 15th five-year plan, there will be new opportunities emerging.
Well, David, last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping urged the two countries to lift their strategic cooperative partnership to a higher level. And in a recent interview with China Media Group, President Li also said the visit will help the relations to enter a new stage of development. As you earlier said, this the first year of a full restoration. So do you expect the visit to deliver a substantial upgrade or, with some solid progress in terms of cooperation for the two countries?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And if I can just talk about that interview that President Lee Jae-myung did with Chinese media, that was the first media interview that he did in the Blue House in Cheongwadae in Seoul after moving back in. The president's office had been moved out of the Blue House, the symbolic home of power in downtown Seoul, by Yoon Suk-yeol into Yongsan. President Lee Jae-myung moved back in, and the first interview that he gave inside the Blue House was not to Korean domestic media, but to Chinese media. So there is symbolism in itself. And he made a point of saying that during the interview. Also during the interview, he stated that in the past, Korea-China relations were a vertical relationship, experiencing different periods of development and transition in the post-World War II period. They had a vertical relationship in terms of labor, technology, and skills. But he then remarked about China's unprecedented development that had taken place under President Xi Jinping. He was full of praise. He mentioned that he'd visited China many times before. And now, in today's meeting, President Lee Jae-myung was talking about a horizontal relationship. So we can see that he views relations between these two countries in a new stage now, and that's because of China's wonderful development and the things that they can do for each other. You asked, is this sort of an upgrade or a recalibration? I think this meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Lee Jae-myung is not about unveiling a new grand architecture or a new design. What it's about repairing the foundations that were allowed to crack under the last decade or so. So what it's doing, it's just trying to restore credibility. That in itself, I think, would count as progress. There's been a lot of antagonisms, and people haven't been meeting for the last decade, the leaders of these two countries. Now, these two leaders, they've met twice in the last 2 months, and all that they're doing, rather than some big grand plan that's going to change the world, simply sitting down together, shaking hands, talking to each other, sharing ideas, bringing business leaders together. I think that setting a foundation for trade, for talks, for diplomacy, that's the most important thing. And that horizontal terminology that South Korean president was using, I think that's really important to pay attention to.
Well, we have TG No. Welcome to the show. Speak of the foundation between the two countries in terms of the relationship. But we know that in the interview, President Lee said that he respect the one China stance. He noted, quote, the consensus reached by the two governments, between China and the Republic of Korea at the time of establishing diplomatic relations remains the core principle governing bilateral ties, as its validity has never changed. I mean, how important is this in terms of bilateral relationship, of course, in terms of China's relationship with other countries, especially given what happened between, the Japanese prime minister's talk of intervene the Chinese reunification process, even militarily?
I think this is very important. I think that the one China principle has been salami sliced all around. And for President Lee Jae-myung to verbally reassert that in its strongest form, in its most original form, I think is a strong statement of reassurance and confidence in the strength of the relationship. And he's saying that Korea is committed to having good relations with China. He's looking to de-escalate. Let's remember that although Korea has thousands of years of good relationship with China as a neighbor from the period from 1945 until almost the 1990s, the People's Republic was designated as an enemy. So this recent relationship with China has actually been a fairly recent one. And to reaffirm that and to state in the most clearest and most undeniable terms that we are reestablishing relations is very important, in particular, given the very, very deleterious and damaging actions that the former President Yoon Suk-yeol took vis-a-vis China in ensuring that he was following U.S. dictates in the pivot to Asia.
Well, of course, there are different factors, different issues here. Zhao Hai, in terms of the foundation, of course, we would love to see, stable relationship. Stability is the foundation. Problem-free, let's say, so we can focus on trade, relationship, and business. Another issue, of course, is about the stability in this region. As you earlier mentioned, the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue. There's a talk of President Lee's expectation that China could play a role in terms of improving relationship, helping to improve relationship between South Korea and North Korea, for example. Do you see there's any room for like three sides, three parties to do something to further stabilize the region?
First of all, let me stress one point I wanted to say, which is the difference between the previous Yoon government and the current Lee government, which is that the previous government sees itself as the advanced, developed country, as a democracy. So that's why they try to get into the G7 and other advanced clubs with the United States, with Japan. So they're getting closer with U.S.-Japan in terms of a U.S.-Japan and South Korea regional alliance. So that's one of the major issues that prompted the North Koreans to be very angry and tearing down some of the communication lines, some of the previous mechanisms between North and South. So to reestablish that relationship and stabilize the regional peace and stability requires South Korea to make more effort to sort of change the minds of the North Koreans to make sure that this region does not be disturbed by the South Korean-American cooperations, particularly nuclear cooperations. Given what happened recently, like I said, North Korea will see a renewed threat from the outside. And just before President Lee's visit, North Korea again launched ballistic missiles towards the east. So I don't think that at this moment North Korea feel safe enough, feel there's enough effort and enough cooperative gesture from the South to actually make further improvement. However, I think because of this visit and because of what President Lee has made clear in China, I think there's an opportunity for both sides to sit down and start another process of bringing peace back and stability back to the peninsula. China, of course, can play a very constructive role in the process. However, given the security ties between South Korea and the United States, it's much more important that South Korea now take the initiative, trying to reach out to the North and and get diplomacy back to work. Again, I think China can provide the platform just like we did 20 years ago for the six-party talk, and then later on for the four-party talks between China, U.S., South, and North Korea. Later on, I think there's a lot of rooms for diplomacy and a lot of rooms for establishing new mechanisms to restore confidence across the 38th parallel and try to bring all the parties together to reestablish sort of a stable security structure upon the Korean Peninsula.
Well, as long as we focus on diplomacy, I mean, that's a positive approach, I would say. KG Noh, of course, Zhao Hai mentioned about the role of the United States. Always there's a role of the United States. South Korea has said to pursue a strategic autonomy. At the same time, of course, they need to, more or less maintain a balance between Beijing and Washington. How do you look at that kind of, on one hand, you want to pursue more strategic autonomy, but at the same time, obviously, you have to pay attention to whether Washington is happy or not, how far you can go in terms of relationship with Beijing?
South Korea's strategic autonomy is actually quite limited. you have to understand the history of South Korea in that it was created by the United States as a bulwark against communism. And as I said before, for decades, it saw China as the enemy. And it still is under U.S. Neo-client status. It still has, for example, its military is under the control, under U.S. command in times of war, which is to say the only time that control of a military matters. And so the president has a difficult task of facing him. He has to walk a tightrope. And it's important that South Korea reclaim its autonomy and it reclaim its sovereignty. But to the extent that it has U.S. bases, over 70 U.S. bases, and to the extent that it is such an incredibly important part of U.S. strategic forward posture vis-a-vis China, I think that we have to be realistic and understand that President Lee Jae-myung, despite his own good intentions, is actually constrained. We'll have to see what happens. I'm very optimistic that President Lee Jae-myung has very, very sincere intentions towards China in improving relations, but I think we also have to name the elephant in the room. The United States is the core geopolitical power which has controlled South Korea's foreign relations since 1945.
Well, David, I mean, of course, the Euro understanding is like the focus of the relationship in terms of economic cooperation, in terms of trade and investment. That's obviously kind of being free from politics, or especially geopolitics. Not exactly so, but in general. So how do you see, you mentioned, horizontal, vertical. Tell us more on that. How do you characterize the relationship, the trade relationship between the countries?
Obviously, the trade relationships, they're dependent on each other because they're so close. And while trade is important, and there were 14 MOUs signed between them, they announced those. And President Lee Jae-myung also took with him the head of Samsung, the head of Hyundai, the head of LG. He took with him a big entourage, 200 people, I believe, and many of the most important financial players in the South Korean economic sector. That in itself sends a message. I think I'd rather, if I may, say something about Lee Jae-myung and the relationship, having listened to your two previous guests and how they've described what they see. Many people about President Lee Jae-myung, before he came into power, assumed that he would adopt the normal posture and position of the democratic leader, and that would be tenuous relationships with Japan, outreach towards Pyongyang, and hopefully going there. But what President Lee Jae-myung has done since coming to power, and he's surprised many, I should say this, is that he's been very nice to Washington and President Trump, paying compliments, giving gifts, suggesting Nobel Peace Prizes. And then with Tokyo, he made his first official trip overseas to Tokyo, sending them a warm message as well. Here with China, he's being very nice with President Xi Jinping. He's saying all the right words, and then towards Pyongyang as well. So while, a lot of commentary and media is trying to divide the world, are you on this side? This is the antagonist. This is the belligerent. This is that. If you actually look at President Lee Jae-myung's behavior since taking office, he's very much trying to be a friend to all sides and refusing to be drawn into this tit for tat. And if you didn't notice that just by his behavior, by his foreign visits and what he's actually doing, also take a look at his ties and his appointments, because he doesn't wear blue ties or red ties. He wears blue and red ties most of the time. He recently appointed, a conservative economist to join his team. So here you have this great pragmatist diplomacy man that's avoiding all these sort of Cold War antagonisms where we put people against each other and suggest this is the good guy and the bad guy. President Lee Jae-myung, he surprised me, I should say, because I didn't expect him to do this. He's really showing that I'll shake hands with everybody because we want peace, we want stability, we want growth. He always mentions growth in all of his speeches. And so while many of us want to get involved in these historical issues and belligerencies, President Lee Jae-myung, he's showing, like some other people, that we can do diplomacy and we can shake hands in Washington, Tokyo, Beijing and Pyongyang. And that's a good example for him to set to other people, I think.
Well, Zhao Hai speaks of being pragmatic. I think in general, if you look at the Chinese foreign policy, if your history, that's also part of the characteristics, the features. That's being pragmatic in terms of cooperation. You cooperate where you can, right? Putting aside the differences. Usually, that's the Chinese approach. What about this particular, this Chinese approach toward South Korea here, cooperate with South Korea? We know that the two presidents witnessed the signing of at least 15 documents in terms of cooperation in science and technology, in biotechnology, and also, of course, economy and trade there. So China has been the largest trading partner of South Korea for 2 decades. So it seems they are strengthening despite the competition because the technology are catching up with each other there. So they are continue focusing on the cooperation side.
Well, absolutely. There's a saying that China and Korea are two neighbors that can't be moved. So in terms of trade, perhaps for the past 1,000 years, China and Korea has been top trading partners with each other, including not just limited to trade, but political relationship, economic relationship, a cultural relationship, historical ties. That runs very deep and very wide. In terms of trade, in particular, China has been trading with South Korea after the establishment of a diplomatic relationship. And for the past decade, China and South Korea has been trading at a very high volume. So I think the past year, 2025, for the first 11 months, the trade has already surpassed over, I think, $300 billion US dollars. However, the relationship has been shifting, has been changing. As David had mentioned, now we're looking at a horizontal economic, not vertical economic relationship, because previously South Korea is providing top line sort of design and manufacturing. China is assembling and exporting to other countries. Now, I think two countries are competing in many areas, and particularly high-tech semiconductors, displays. However, as the two leaders has made it very clear, and particularly Myung, before coming to China in the interview, has said that very clearly that he wants cooperation. And President Xi also made it very clear that China's future development will provide a bigger cake for two sides. This should not be a zero-sum game. This should be a win-win economic cooperation. So again, in many areas they refer to, like the AI, like the green technology, like the silver economy, in all those areas, there's a very wide cooperation that's been there's a barrier before because of political reasons. And now, because of pragmatic diplomacy by President Lee, I think the door has opened again. And in the future, I hope that the two countries can get rid of the barriers and continue to build more bridges, and particularly cultural, people-to-people bridges, so that young people in South Korea will have a more friendly relationship view of China, and making their leaders have wider choices, wider options.
Well, speak of that, KG, of course, one important aspect of the two countries' relationship is cultural ties and people-to-people exchanges. We know that on in both sides there are some sometimes views probably narrow-minded, lack of understanding of each other. But what can we do, especially for the young generation? I mean, to visit each other, to meet each other, and to have a better understanding of each other, so we can have a stable relationship for the generations to come.
I think the most important thing is for people-to-people ties to be enhanced. We know that right now South Korean youth, young people, are going to Shanghai on the weekends because of the new visa agreements. This is making tremendous waves. But I think that we do have to be honest that there is a strong trend of anti-China sentiment in South Korea right now, largely driven by the extreme right and certainly fanned by extreme right forces in the United States that want a confrontation between China and the United States. But I think it's important for Koreans in general to remember how much cultural interchange has existed between Korea and China over the millennia. just, two examples, about 60% of Korea's vocabulary is actually Chinese. It's directly lifted from Chinese vocabulary. And the other thing is anybody who looks at the Korean flag should realize that the South Korean flag is actually derived from the bagua, the Tai Chi symbol, which is an ancient Chinese symbol. So I think these are things to remember, and I think further development of people-to-people relations will be the key thing that will make a difference.
David, you agree? More people-to-people exchange with each other?
Just listening to your wonderfully eloquent previous guest sort of deny most of South Korean's autonomy. Its flag is from China. Its army is from America. What do these people have left? But in essence, yes, I do agree. One thing I often make clear is a lot of my Chinese students, they have a wonderful fascination with South Korean modern culture, the music, the cosmetics, the beauty, the food. And I wish that more people, not just South Korean people, but more people around the world understood Chinese pop music. I wish they could name Chinese pop songs. I wish they could name Chinese movies and dramas, because, I mean, I love Zhao Hai. I play that on my guitar. But people around the world, they don't know Chinese pop music as much as they know K-pop. They don't know Chinese dramas as much as they know K-dramas. And a lot of that is the delivery system. So yes, people to people is very important. That really increases our acceptance and understanding of different people. But by the same time, media also plays a very important role. And so while we can't always do people to people, we can always search out, let's listen to some music from that country. Let's watch some movies. Let's look at some art. Let's read some poetry. And I wish there was more of that available, because young people, they love music and they love watching things. They love digital content. A little bit more of that around the world coming out of China into people's phones, that would be wonderful.
Well, speak of that, Zhao Hai, I guess we do have increasing content, probably like La Bubu, Noja, and give it a time, I guess. Yeah, people will get more and more that kind of a content or with the Chinese features there. But I think, for one thing, Zhao Hai, obviously, stable relationship, friendly relationship is a common pursuit, is a common interest for both countries. 30 seconds.
For me?
Yes, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. I think look at the world. What is happening around the world? There's chaos. There's might is right coming back, and the international system, global governance is falling apart. In this environment, I think South Korea, of course, there's domestic problems, economic problems. President Lee is actually facing headwinds. So he needs stability, a good environment to have economic growth. For China, too, for the next decade, it's critical for China to establish, to construct its own national economy. So I think both sides share huge common interest in maintaining regional stability and peace.
Right. With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. I'm Xu Jinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.